I never thought I'd be rewriting my will at 73. The morning of my birthday, I sat in the breakfast nook of Maplehill House, watching the Atlantic waves crash against the rocks below, waiting for a phone call that never came. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 47 years of birthday celebrations. Not a single call, not even a text message. The birthday calendar on my kitchen wall stared back at me, filled with my careful notations of everyone else's special days. Elena's promotion dinner last month, David's anniversary gift I'd helped choose, Lina's emergency loan when her influencer career hit a rough patch. But today, silence. Have I become so invisible that even my own birthday disappeared? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I woke that morning the way I'd woken every day for the past decade since Harold passed alone, but not necessarily lonely. The master bedroom at Maplehill House faced east, and the October sunrise painted the walls in shades of amber and rose that reminded me why Harold and I had fallen in love with this place 40 years ago. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper, with good bones and better views. Harold had whispered in my ear, like you. So Joe, and I'd elbowed him in the ribs while trying not to laugh. Now, the good bones creaked a little more each year, and the views had become my most faithful companions. I reached for my glasses on the knit stand, next to the silver-framed wedding photograph that had watched over my sleep since 1972. Harold in his rented tuxedo, me in my mother's altered dress, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. In many ways, we had. The hardwood floors were cold beneath my feet as I padded to the kitchen, my morning routine as predictable as the tight schedule I'd memorized over the decades. Coffee first, the good Colombian beans I ordered online because the local grocery store had given up on anything more sophisticated than Folgers. Then the newspaper, though I'd long ago switched to reading it on my tablet because the print edition kept shrinking and arriving later each month. Rosa would arrive at 9, as she had every Tuesday and Friday for the past 12 years. She'd started coming when Harold's health began failing, and I'd kept her on after he died because the house felt too quiet without another heartbeat moving through its rooms. Rosa Martinez was 68, 3 years younger than Harold would have been, and had the kind of practical wisdom that comes from raising 6 children on a housekeeper's salary while sending 4 of them to college. "Morning, Mrs. Coon," she'd say, though I'd been asking her to call me Sojo for years. "You're up early today. It's my birthday. Rosa, 73 today." Rosa paused in hanging her coat on the hook by the back door, her dark eyes, sharp as her wit, scanned my face with the attention of someone who'd learned to read the subtleties of mood and meaning. "And how are we celebrating?" I shrug, stirring my coffee counterclockwise 3 times, the way Harold had taught me his grandmother insisted brought good luck. "I suppose we'll see if anyone remembers." Rosa's silence spoke volumes. She'd been here for enough forgotten birthdays, overlooked Mother's Days, and Christmas mornings when the phone barely rang. She'd watch me wrap gifts with increasing care and receive thank you calls with decreasing frequency. Rosa saw everything and said little, but her loyalty was unwavering. By 10 o'clock, I'd finished the crossword puzzle a Tuesday medium that took me exactly 18 minutes and started my second cup of coffee. The birthday calendar on the kitchen wall caught my eye, its careful notations a testament to my decades of remembering. Elena's birthday in red ink, call early, big presentation that day. David's in blue, Martha's allergic to roses, get daisies. Lina's in purple, Instagram post with throwback photo, every birthday, anniversary, graduation, and promotion marked in my careful handwriting. The calendar represented something I'd been proud of once, being the family's emotional center, the one who remembered what mattered. Now it felt like evidence of a one-sided relationship. My phone sat silent on the counter, its black screen reflecting my face back at me. I'd charged it overnight, checked the volume twice, even restarted it once just to be sure, but 73 years of birthdays had taught me to recognize the particular quality of silence that meant I'd been forgotten. Elena was probably in her Boston office by now, power-dressed and commanding some conference room full of corporate lawyers. She'd inherited Harold's strategic mind and my determination, But somewhere along the way, she'd lost the softness that makes strategic minds worth having. Our conversations had become quarterly reports: her career progress, her investment portfolio, her latest business trip. When I asked about her personal life, she changed the subject to David's children or Lina's latest social media venture. David lived only 45 minutes away in Millbrook, close enough for regular visits but far enough to justify their rarity. He'd married Martha straight out of college, and they'd produced 3 children in 4 years before settling into the comfortable chaos of suburban family life. I loved watching him with Isaac and Belle, the twins who just turned 13, and their younger brother Tommy. David was patient with them in ways their generation of fathers had learned to be, present in ways my generation of fathers had struggled with. But David's presence came with an expiration date. He'd arrive at Maplehill House with genuine enthusiasm, help me with small repairs, listen to my stories about the neighbourhood changes, and promise to visit again soon. Then weeks would pass in a blur of soccer practices, school events, and weekend errands, and soon would stretch into months. Lina, my youngest at 34, had moved to Los Angeles 5 years ago to build her brand. She'd started an Instagram account showcasing her styling work, and it had slowly grown into something resembling a career. She tagged me in posts, occasionally throwback photos of family gatherings at Maplehill House that she'd frame with captions about grateful hearts and family roots. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd turned our family memories into content, while rarely creating new ones. But the grandchildren, they were the brightest spots in the complicated constellation of family relationships. Isaac and Belle had inherited Harold's curiosity and my creative streak. They'd spend summer weeks at Maplehill House, painting watercolors on the screen porch, building elaborate sandcastles on the private beach, and listening to my stories about the house's history. Last summer, though, they'd been too busy with sports camps and academic enrichment programs. David had apologized repeatedly, promising they'd visit during Christmas break. Christmas had come and gone with a hurried lunch between their commitments to Martha's family and their friends' parties. By 11:30, I'd cleaned the coffee pot twice and reorganized the spice cabinet. Rosa was upstairs changing the linens in the guest bedrooms that rarely hosted guests anymore. The mail truck rumbled up the gravel driveway, and I found myself hoping for birthday cards the way I'd hoped for college acceptance letters 50 years ago. Bills, catalogues, a notice about the town's upcoming Halloween festival. No cards. The afternoon stretched ahead of me like a blank canvas full of potential, but requiring me to choose what to create with it. I could drive into town, perhaps stop by the library or the art supply store. I could work in the garden, though October in coastal Maine offered limited opportunities for meaningful cultivation. I could call someone myself, though the prospect of hearing "oh, was that today?" felt worse than continued silence. Instead, I found myself in Harold's old study, drawn to the mahogany desk where he'd paid bills and I'd planned family celebrations for decades. The bottom drawer stuck slightly, warped from years of humid summers, but I coaxed it open to reveal the manila folder labeled important documents. Our wills sat beneath mortgage papers and insurance policies, last updated 3 years ago when I'd had a health scare that turned out to be nothing more than anxiety over Lina's financial struggles. The will was straightforward: the house and most of my assets divided equally among my 3 children, with smaller bequests for the grandchildren's education and a modest sum for Rosa. I'd written it with the assumption that my children would remember me as fondly as I remembered them, that they'd gather occasionally in these rooms, sharing stories about their childhood at Maplehill House, maintaining the family traditions I'd worked so hard to establish. But sitting in Harold's chair, surrounded by the silence of a forgotten birthday, I began to wonder if that assumption had been naive. When had I last received a call that wasn't about money, advice, or some crisis requiring my intervention? When had any of my children expressed curiosity about my life, my thoughts, my dreams beyond my role as their mother? The realization settled over me slowly, like fog rolling in from the Atlantic. I'd become a function rather than a person to them, the reliable source of emergency funds, birthday gifts, and holiday traditions. They loved the idea of me, the security of knowing I was here, but they'd stopped seeing me as someone with her own needs, her own feelings, her own worth beyond what I could provide. Rosa's footsteps creaked overhead as she finished the upstairs cleaning. In an hour, she'd leave for her second job, cleaning the Henderson's house across town. She worked harder at 68 than my children did in their prime, supporting a daughter whose husband had left and caring for a mother whose medical bills consumed most of Rosa's modest income. Yet, Rosa remembered my birthday. Rosa asked about my health, my painting, the books I was reading. Rosa saw me as a person worthy of attention and care. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman I paid to clean my house offered me more genuine relationship than the children I'd raised and the grandchildren I adored. As the sun began its descent toward the Atlantic, painting the study in the golden light that had drawn Harold and me to this house so many years ago, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began writing a list not of family birthdays to remember, but of people who had remembered mine. The blank birthday card had been sitting in my desk drawer for 3 weeks, wrapped in tissue paper like a secret I was keeping from myself. I'd bought it at Morrison's stationery downtown on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, telling myself it was silly, even as I paid the elderly clerk who'd known my family since Elena was in pigtails. For someone special, Mrs. Morrison had asked, the way small-town shopkeepers do, genuinely interested, but politely non-invasive. For my birthday, I'd said, then immediately felt foolish. Just in case, I want to send myself something nice. Mrs. Morrison had smiled with the kind of understanding that comes from watching families evolve over decades. Sometimes we have to be our own best advocates, dear. Now, at 5:15 on my 73rd birthday, I unwrapped that card and set it on Harold's desk. The front featured a watercolor lighthouse, remarkably similar to the one visible from our bedroom window. Inside, it was blank except for the printed message, wishing you joy, peace, and beautiful new beginnings. I opened my fountain penner, retirement gift from my fellow teachers at Millbrook Elementary, and began to write. Dear Sojo, I began, feeling simultaneously ridiculous and liberated. Happy birthday to a woman who has spent 73 years putting everyone else's happiness before her own. Today marks not just another year of life, but the first day of living differently. The words flowed more easily than I'd expected, like water finding its natural course after being dammed too long. I wrote about the painting I'd abandoned when Elena needed help with law school applications. About the travel dreams I'd deferred when David's family needed financial support. About the friendships I'd neglected because family obligations always came first. By the time I finished, the card contained 3 pages of careful script, a manifesto of sorts, addressed to myself. It meant for the universe to witness. I sealed it in its envelope and placed it on the mantelpiece in the living room, next to the collection of family photos that documented decades of celebrations where I was always behind the camera, never the subject of focus. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her coat already on, but her expression concerned. I'm heading to the Hendersons now, Mrs. Kuhn. Are you sure you'll be all right here alone tonight? I'll be fine, Rosa. Actually, I've been thinking. What are you doing this weekend? Rosa's eyebrows rose slightly. Saturday morning I clean for the Pattersons, but Saturday afternoon and Sunday are free. Why, I'd like to take you to lunch somewhere nice. As a thank you for all the years of friendship, Mrs. Kuhn, you don't need to. I know I don't need to. I want to. There's a difference. After Rosa left, the house settled into its evening quiet, but tonight the silence felt different. Instead of echoing with loneliness, it hummed with possibility. I moved through the room slowly, seeing them with fresh eyes, as if I were a prospective peer rather than someone who'd lived here for decades. The living room still bore the marks of family life, scuff marks on the hardwood where David had learned to ride his bicycle indoors one February, a small paint stain on the crown moulding where Lina had helped me redecorate when she was 7. The kitchen retained the worn spots near the sink, where I'd stood preparing thousands of meals, and the breakfast nook still showed the pencil marks where we'd measured the children's height each birthday. But these weren't just markers of family history anymore. They were evidence of a life fully lived, of a woman who'd created a home that nurtured and sustained others. That woman deserved better than forgotten birthdays and infrequent phone calls. In the study, I pulled out the phone book. Yes, I still kept a physical phone book, much to Lina's amusement, and looked up the number for Greenbaum and Associates. Harold and I had used Jerry Greenbaum for all our legal needs since 1978, when he'd been a young lawyer fresh from Boston University. Now he was nearing retirement himself, but his practice still handled estate planning with the kind of personal attention that had become rare in modern business. I called and left a message with his answering service. "This is Sojo Kun. I'd like to schedule an appointment to update my will. It's not an emergency, but I'd prefer to handle this within the week if possible." The act of making that call felt momentous, like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. I wasn't sure exactly what I intended to paint, but I knew the current composition wasn't serving me anymore. I spent the evening going through photo albums, not with the melancholy I'd expected, but with the analytical eye I'd once brought to selecting paintings for the school art show. Which memories still brought me joy, which relationships had remained reciprocal and genuine. Which people in my life had continued to see me as a complete person, rather than just a source of support. The answers surprised me with their clarity. There was Mac Evans, Harold's college roommate and best friend, who'd started joining me for morning walks along the beach 6 months ago. Mac had lost his wife, Claire, around the same time I'd lost Harold, and our shared grief had evolved into something that felt remarkably like companionship. Mac asked about my painting, brought me books he thought I'd enjoy, and never treated our conversations like obligations to be endured. There was Charlene at the Millbrook Public Library, who'd started setting aside art books she knew would interest me and had recently suggested I join the memoir writing group that met Thursday evenings in the library's community room. Charlene had emigrated from Jamaica 30 years ago and had the kind of perspective that comes from rebuilding a life from scratch in middle age. There was Dr. Patricia Wynne, my internist, who'd become something resembling a friend over the past few years. Patricia was about Elena's age, but possessed the warmth and genuine interest in others that my daughter seemed to have lost somewhere between law school and partnership track. And there was Rosa, of course, Rosa, who noticed when I seemed tired and insisted I rest while she handled the heavy cleaning. Rosa, who brought me homemade empanadas because she knew I loved them. Rosa, who asked about my dreams and actually listened to the answers. As I compared these relationships to my interactions with my own children, the contrast became painfully clear. My children called when they needed something. These friends engaged with me because they valued my company. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, its deep brass voice filling the quiet house. I'd grown up believing that family bonds were unbreakable, that blood relationships carried obligations that transcended convenience or compatibility. But looking at the evidence spread across Harold's desk, Christmas cards from Rosa, book recommendations from Charlene, walking schedule texts from Mac, I began to wonder if chosen family might be more reliable than given family. I thought about Harold's mother, who'd lived with us for her final 5 years. Grandma Coon had been sharp-tongued and demanding, critical of my housekeeping and skeptical of my parenting methods, but she'd also been present. She'd shown up for every school play, every birthday party, every family milestone, bringing her acerbic commentary and fierce loyalty in equal measure. Family isn't about being related, she'd told me once, while watching Elena practice violin with the determination of someone who'd inherited Harold's persistence. Family is about showing up, especially when it's inconvenient. Had my children forgotten that lesson, or had I failed to teach it properly? The phone rang at 9:30, and for a moment my heart jumped with the irrational hope that one of my children had remembered, that they were calling with apologies and explanations. "So, Joe, it's Mac. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all." "How are you?" "I'm well, but I realized today that I never wished you a happy birthday." Forgive an old man's faulty memory. I felt tears prick at my eyes, though whether from gratitude or sadness, I couldn't say. "How did you know it was my birthday? Harold mentioned it years ago." "October 15th, same day as Nietzsche's birthday," he said. He was proud that he'd married a philosopher. The tears came in earnest then, not the bitter tears of the morning, but something softer, more healing. "Thank you for remembering, Mac. Would you like some company?" "I could bring tea and we could sit on your porch for a while." I looked around the empty house, at the unopened bottle of wine I'd bought for a celebration that never materialized. At the birthday cake I'd considered buying for myself, but decided would be too pathetic. I'd like that very much. Mac arrived 20 minutes later with a thermos of chamomile tea and a small wrapped package. We settled into the wicker chairs on the screen porch, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below and watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the dark water. "I brought you something," he said, handing me the package. "It's nothing elaborate, but when I saw it, I thought of you." Inside was a small sketchbook, its cover made from handmade paper embedded with pressed flowers. The pages were thick and creamy, perfect for watercolors or pencil drawings. "Mac, this is beautiful. You didn't need to. Harold used to talk about your painting," he said quietly. "He was proud of your talent, regretful that you'd set it aside." "I didn't set it aside. Life just got in the way. Maybe it's time to let life get out." Of the way, we sat in comfortable silence, sharing the tea and watching the stars emerge above the Atlantic. For the first time all day, I felt seen, valued, remembered for reasons that had nothing to do with what I could provide for others. "Mac," I said finally, "what would you do if your children forgot your birthday?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the care he brought to all conversations. "I suppose I'd ask myself why it mattered so much. Is it the birthday itself, or what the forgetting represents? What it represents, and what does it represent to you? That I've become invisible, that all the love I poured into raising them, all the sacrifices I made, all the times I put their needs before my own, none of it earned me even basic consideration. And how does that make you feel about the future?" I looked out at the lighthouse beam, steady and dependable in its rotation, warning ships away from dangerous rocks. "Like I need to change course before I crash." Mac nodded slowly. "Sometimes the best gift we can give the people we love is the consequence of taking us for granted." His words settled into my consciousness like seeds finding fertile ground. Consequences. I'd been so focused on maintaining family harmony, on being available and accommodating, that I'd never considered what message my constant forgiveness might be sending. After Mac left, I sat alone on the porch for another hour, planning the conversation I'd have with Jerry Greenbaum. I wasn't acting from spite or revenge, but from a newly awakened sense of self-worth. If my children couldn't be bothered to remember my existence, perhaps they shouldn't be the primary beneficiaries of my life's work. The decision felt both radical and completely logical, like solving a puzzle I'd been working on 4 years without. Realizing it, I met Jerry Greenbaum at his office the following Wednesday, exactly 8 days after my forgotten birthday. The law firm occupied a converted Victorian house on Millbrook's Main Street, its rooms still retaining the warm domesticity of family life despite decades of legal practice. Jerry's office was on the second floor, in what had once been a master bedroom, and the tall windows overlooked the town green where I'd taken my children to play 30 years ago. Jerry was 70 himself, with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of a career spent helping families navigate life's complexities rather than exploit them. He'd handled Harold's estate with efficiency and compassion, never making me feel rushed or overwhelmed during those difficult months after the funeral. "So Joe," he said, rising from behind his desk to greet me with genuine warmth, "it's good to see you. How are you managing these days?" "I'm well, Jerry, better than well, actually. I'm making some changes." He gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where Harold and I had signed our original wills in 1985. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" I pulled out a folder containing my current will and the notes I'd made over the past week. "I want to rewrite my will completely. New beneficiaries, new allocations, new priorities." Jerry's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "May I ask what's prompted this decision?" "My family forgot my birthday last week, all of them. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and not one phone call, text message, or card." "I'm sorry to hear that." "So Joe, that must have been painful." It was, but it was also clarifying. I've spent decades organizing my life around their needs, their schedules, their priorities. I've deferred my own dreams, my own interests, my own relationships to be available whenever they needed support. And the result is that I've become so peripheral to their lives that they can't even remember when I was born. Jerry leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in the way I remembered from previous meetings. These kinds of decisions can feel very clear in moments of hurt or anger. Sometimes it's wise to let some time pass before making permanent changes. I've had a week to think about it, Jerry, and honestly, this isn't about the birthday itself. It's about a pattern of being taken for granted that's been building for years. I'm 73 years old. How much time should I wait? He nodded slowly. Tell me what you have in mind. I opened my folder and pulled out the legal pad where I'd outlined my new intentions. I want to leave the house to Rosa Martinez, my housekeeper. She's worked for me for 12 years, and she's shown more genuine care and interest in my well-being than my own children have. Jerry made notes on his legal pad, but I could see the questions forming in his expression. I want to establish an education fund for Rosa's grandchildren. She has 3 who are college-bound in the next few years. I want to leave a substantial sum to the Millbrook Public Library to fund their community programming. And I want to leave something meaningful to Mac Evans, Harold's friend who's become a dear companion. And your children, they can have personal items, family photos, things with sentimental value. But the financial inheritance will go to people who've actually been present in my life. Jerry set down his pen and leaned forward. So Joe, I've known your family for decades. I've watched Elena, David, and Lina grow up. They're good people who love you, even if they're not perfect at showing it. Are they, though, good people who love me? Or are they people who love the idea of me, the security of knowing I'm here when they need something, but who don't actually see me as a person with my own needs and feelings? That's a fair question, but consider this: sometimes people assume that strong, capable people like you don't need the same level of attention and care that others require. Your children may take your resilience for granted without realizing how that affects you. I considered his words, recognizing the truth in them while also feeling frustrated by the implication that I should continue bearing the burden of their assumptions. Jerry, let me ask you something. In all the years you've known my family, when was the last time one of my children called just to ask how I was doing? Not because they needed advice, or money, or help with something, but simply because they wanted to know about my life. He was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through decades of interactions and observations. I can't recall a specific instance, neither can I, and that's the problem. I've become a resource to them, not a person they value for my own sake. Jerry made more notes, his expression thoughtful. If you proceed with these changes, you understand that it will likely create significant family conflict. I do, but Jerry, I'm 73 years old. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding conflict, smoothing over problems, accommodating everyone else's needs. What has that gotten me? A lonely birthday, and the realization that I've trained my family to treat me as optional. What about the grandchildren? Isaac and Belle have always seemed close to you. This was the part that had given me the most pause in my planning. They are close to me, or they were, but they're teenagers now, caught up in their own lives, and they're learning from their parents' example. If I don't establish boundaries now, they'll grow up thinking it's acceptable to treat people who love them as disposable conveniences. Jerry leaned back again, clearly weighing his professional obligations against his personal relationship with our family. I can draft the will you're describing, so Joe, but I want to make sure you've considered all the implications. Have you thought about talking to your children first? Explaining how their behavior has affected you? I've thought about it. But Jerry, I'm tired of being the one who has to teach grown adults how to treat people with basic courtesy and respect. I'm tired of making excuses for their neglect and managing their emotions when they face consequences for their choices. This will be quite a shock to them. Good. Maybe shock is what they need to wake up and recognize what they've been taking for granted. Jerry made several more notes, then looked up at me with the expression of someone who'd spent decades helping families through difficult transitions. There's another way to approach this, if you're interested in exploring it. What do you mean? Instead of removing them entirely, you could create a conditional inheritance. They could earn their portions by demonstrating genuine engagement with your life over a specified period. Meaningful visits, regular communication that isn't transactional, participation in activities that matter to you. I found myself intrigued by this possibility. Tell me more. We could establish criteria, say, monthly visits that last more than an hour, weekly phone calls that aren't requests for help or advice, and participation in family traditions that you value. If they meet these conditions for a full year, they inherit as originally planned. If not, their portions go to your chosen alternatives. The idea had appeal. It would give my children an opportunity to recognize their patterns and change them, while also ensuring that my assets would ultimately go to people who genuinely valued my presence in their lives. Could we make it more specific? More meaningful, certainly. What did you have in mind? I thought about the things that would demonstrate real interest in my life as opposed to mere obligation fulfillment. They'd need to ask about my painting, my reading, my friendships. They'd need to remember important things I've told them about my interests and follow up on them. They'd need to invite me into their lives instead of just updating me on their activities. We could certainly structure conditions around quality of engagement rather than just frequency of contact. And if they don't meet the conditions, then your alternative distribution plan takes effect. Rosa gets the house, the education. Funds are established. The library receives its bequest. I felt a flutter of excitement at the possibility. This approach would give my children a chance to wake up and change their behavior, while also ensuring that I wouldn't spend my remaining years being taken for granted. How long would it take to draft something like this? A week, maybe 2. If we want to make sure all the conditions are clearly defined and legally sound, let's do it. But Jerry, I want to be very clear about the standards. This isn't about them going through the motions or checking boxes. It's about them genuinely reconnecting with me as a person they value. Understood. I'll draft something and we can refine it together. As I left Jerry's office and walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. The conditional approach felt like the right balance between self-advocacy and fairness. My children would have an opportunity to recognize how they'd been treating me and make meaningful changes. If they couldn't or wouldn't, then my assets would go to people who'd never taken my care and attention for granted. Either way, I would finally know where I stood with the people who claimed to love me. The drive home took me past the elementary school where I taught for 32 years, past the playground where I'd pushed my children on swings and bandaged their scraped knees. Those memories felt different now, not painful, but instructive. I'd been a good mother, a devoted teacher, a caring friend. I'd raised children who were successful and capable adults, but somewhere in the process of giving them everything they needed, I'd forgotten to teach them that relationships require reciprocity, that love without consideration isn't really love at all. It wasn't too late to teach them that lesson now. The manila envelope from Jerry Greenbaum arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after our meeting. Rosa was dusting the living room bookshelves when I signed for the certified delivery, and I could see her curiosity in the way she glanced toward the official-looking package while maintaining her focus on her work. Legal papers, I explained, settling into Harold's chair in the study to review the documents. Just updating some things, Rosa nodded, but her expression carried the concern of someone who'd seen too many families torn apart by legal disputes. She'd worked with the Hendersons during their bitter divorce, the Pattersons through their son's lawsuit over his father's business, and the Clearys when their mother's dementia led to a contested guardianship. Rosa understood that legal papers often preceded family heartbreak. The conditional will was more complex than I'd expected, but Jerry had crafted it with the kind of precision that left no room for misinterpretation. Each of my children had 12 months from the date they were notified to demonstrate consistent, meaningful engagement with my life. The conditions were specific without being unrealistic. Monthly visits lasting at least 2 hours, weekly phone calls focused on my interests rather than their needs, and participation in 3 significant activities or events that mattered to me. But it wasn't just about frequency. Jerry had captured my intention perfectly by including qualitative measures. They needed to ask about my painting and remember what I'd told them from conversation to conversation. They needed to inquire about my friends and activities beyond surface-level politeness. They needed to treat me as someone they were genuinely interested in knowing, not just someone they felt obligated to contact. The consequences were equally clear. Children who met the conditions would inherit as originally planned. Those who didn't would forfeit their inheritance to my alternative beneficiaries, Rosa, the library, Mac, and several other people who'd shown genuine care for my well-being over the years. I read through the document 3 times, appreciating Jerry's careful language and thorough attention to detail. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about establishing clear expectations for the kinds of relationships I wanted to maintain in my remaining years. Rosa finished the living room and moved to the kitchen, where I could hear her humming an old Mexican folk song her mother had taught her. Rosa's presence in my life had become one of its most reliable sources of comfort, not because she was paid to be here, but because she approached our relationship with genuine warmth and attention. "Rosa," I called, "could you join me for a moment?" She appeared in the study doorway, slightly breathless from the physical work of cleaning. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Kuhn? Sit down, please." "I want to talk to you about something important." Rosa settled into the chair across from Harold's desk, her hands folded in her lap with the careful attention she brought to all our conversations. "These legal papers involve you," I began, watching her expression shift from curiosity to concern. "Not in any negative way, but in a way that might change your life significantly." I explained the conditional will carefully, emphasizing that regardless of my children's behavior, she would receive a substantial bequest for her years of faithful service and genuine friendship. If any of my children failed to meet the conditions, her inheritance would increase dramatically. Rosa listened without speaking, her dark eyes growing wider as she began to understand the implications. When I finished, she sat in silence for several moments, clearly processing what she'd heard. "Mrs. Kuhn," she said, finally, "I don't feel comfortable being part of something that might hurt your relationship with your children." "Rosa, you're not hurting my relationship with my children. They've already done that by treating me as optional in their lives. This will simply makes their choices visible and creates consequences for them. But what if they find out? What if they think I encourage this somehow? They'll find out because I'm going to tell them. This isn't a secret or a trap. It's a clear statement of my expectations and an opportunity for them to demonstrate that they value me as more than just a source of support when they need something." Rosa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I clean houses for a living, Mrs. Kuhn. I'm not someone who inherits beautiful homes like this one." "Rosa, in the 12 years you've worked here, you've shown more consistent interest in my well-being than my own children have. You remember what books I'm reading, what paintings I'm working on, what concerns I have about my health or my friendships. You ask about my life because you care about me as a person, not because you need something from me. That's just being decent to people." "Exactly. And if my children can't manage that basic decency consistently for 12 months, then they don't deserve to inherit the life I've built." Rosa was quiet again, clearly struggling with the magnitude of what I was telling her. "What would I do with a house like this? Whatever you wanted. Live in it, sell it, rent it out, and use the income to support your family. It would be yours to decide. My grandchildren could come here for summers, like yours used to. They could. And unlike my grandchildren, they might actually appreciate the opportunity." Rosa smiled at that, then grew serious again. "Mrs. Kuhn, are you sure this is what you want? Once you tell your children about this, things will change between you. Maybe not for the better." "Things have already changed, Rosa. They changed when my children decided I wasn't worth remembering on my birthday. They changed when they started treating me like a convenience rather than a person they love. This will just make the change official and give them an opportunity to choose a different path. And if they choose the path that leads away from you, then at least I'll know where I stand. And my assets will go to people who've never taken my care and attention for granted." After Rosa left that afternoon, I spent several hours in the art studio I'd set up in the sunroom overlooking the garden. It was a small space, just large enough for an easel and a table for supplies, but it had become my favorite room in the house over the past year. I'd started painting again 6 months ago, inspired partly by Mac's encouragement and partly by the memoir writing group Charlene had convinced me to join. The act of putting brush to canvas felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd set aside for so long I'd almost forgotten it existed. The current painting was a watercolor of the view from my bedroom window, the lighthouse perched on the rocky outcropping, the Atlantic stretching toward the horizon, the small boats that dotted the harbor on summer mornings. It wasn't sophisticated work, but it captured something I felt, but couldn't quite express in words, the sense of being anchored to a place, while also yearning for distant shores. Harold used to joke that I painted like I lived with careful attention to detail, but also with an underlying sense of adventure. You make the familiar look mysterious, he'd say, watching me work on one of the landscapes that had covered our walls during the early years of our marriage. I'd abandoned painting when Elena started high school and needed help with college preparations. There had always been some family crisis or obligation that took precedence over my creative work. But as I stood in the sunroom now, brush in hand, and afternoon light streaming through the windows, I wondered what I might have accomplished if I'd been more protective of this time and space. The thought didn't fill me with regret, exactly, but with a kind of determined resolve. I'd spent decades putting my family's needs first, and they'd grown so accustomed to my sacrifices that they couldn't even remember my birthday. If I only had 10 or 15 good years left, I was going to live them differently. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. Sorry, we've been so busy lately. Kids have midterms and Martha's been swamped at work. How are you doing? The message was perfectly pleasant and utterly generic. It could have been sent to any family member or acquaintance. There was no acknowledgement of my birthday, no specific question about my life, no indication that he'd thought about me for any reason other than guilt over prolonged silence. I set the phone aside without responding. The conditional would give David and his siblings exactly 12 months to learn how to communicate with me as if I was someone they actually cared about knowing. If they succeeded, they'd inherit the life I'd built. If they didn't, at least I'd have a year of clarity about where our relationships actually stood. Either way, I would stop making excuses for their neglect and managing their emotions when they faced the consequences of their choices. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkening water as I cleaned my brushes and put away my paints. Tomorrow was Thursday, which meant memoir writing group at the library. Charlene had been encouraging me to write about my decision to change my will, arguing that other women might benefit from hearing about someone who'd chosen self-worth over family harmony. Stories have power, she'd said during our last meeting. When we share how we've navigated difficult choices, we give other people permission to make their own difficult choices. Maybe it was time to start writing that story. The discovery happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon in November, 6 weeks after I'd signed the conditional will. I'd been looking for my old easel in the attic, thinking it might be sturdier than the lightweight one I'd been using in the sunroom. Rosa had offered to help me search, but I'd insisted on climbing the narrow stairs myself, determined to maintain my independence for as long as possible. The attic at Maplehill House ran the full length of the building, with dormer windows on either end that provided surprisingly good natural light. Harold and I had used it primarily for storage, and over the decades it had accumulated the archaeological layers of family life, boxes of children's artwork, outgrown clothes, Christmas decorations, and furniture we'd replaced but couldn't bring ourselves to discard. I found the easel quickly enough, folded flat against the south wall near a stack of Harold's old photography equipment. But as I maneuvered it away from the wall, I knocked over a large portfolio case I didn't immediately recognize. It fell open, spilling its contents across the dusty floor in a cascade of color and memory. My paintings, dozens of them, carefully stored and completely forgotten. I knelt on the wooden floor, heedless of the dust on my knees, and began gathering the loose canvases and sheets of watercolor paper. Here was the series of harbor scenes I'd painted during Elena's senior year of high school. Here were the woodland studies I'd worked on when David was in middle school and Lina was still small enough to nap in the afternoons. Here was the portrait of Harold reading in his favorite chair, painted for our 20th wedding anniversary and somehow lost in the shuffle of daily life. The work was better than I'd remembered. The colors were confident, the compositions thoughtful, the brushwork more skilled than I'd given myself credit for. These weren't the tentative efforts of a hobbyist, but the accomplished work of someone with genuine talent and developing vision. At the bottom of the portfolio, I found a manila envelope containing rejection letters from galleries, art fair applications I'd never submitted, and a business card for an art instructor in Portland who'd invited me to join an advanced painting workshop. The envelope was dated 1995, Elena's freshman year of college, when I'd briefly considered taking my painting more seriously. I remembered that autumn clearly now. Elena had been struggling with the transition to university life, calling home several times a week in tears about her workload, her roommate, her fear that she wasn't smart enough for law school. Harold had suggested I use the sudden quiet of the empty nest to pursue my own interests, but Elena's distress had made that feel selfish and frivolous. I'd put the portfolio in the attic temporarily, planning to return to it once Elena had found her footing. But Elena's crises had been followed by David's college years, then his wedding planning, then Lina's various emergencies and achievements. There had always been some family need that took precedence over my artistic ambitions. Now, sitting in the dusty attic surrounded by 30 years of abandoned paintings, I felt a complex mixture of grief and anger, grief for the artist I might have become if I'd been more protective of my creative time. Anger at myself for being so quick to sacrifice my dreams, and at my family for never questioning whether those sacrifices were necessary or fair. I carried the paintings downstairs, carefully, making several trips to transport them all to the sunroom. Rosa was preparing to leave for the day when she saw me arranging canvases along the walls. "Mrs. Kuhn, where did these come from?" "They're beautiful, the attic. I'd forgotten they were there." Rosa moved slowly through the room, studying each painting. With genuine attention, she paused longest at the portrait of Harold, her expression soft with recognition and admiration. "You painted this?" "You painted all of these? Years ago." I stopped when the children needed more attention, but these are professional quality. "You could sell these in galleries." I looked around the room with fresh eyes, seeing my work through Rosa's perspective. She was right, these paintings deserved to be seen, appreciated, perhaps even purchased by people who would value them. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Rosa, what would you think about having an art show here at the house, maybe in the spring?" Her face lit up with enthusiasm. "Like the garden tour the Historical Society does. But for your paintings, something like that, an open house where people could see the work and maybe buy pieces they connect with." "Mrs. Kuhn, that's a wonderful idea. And it would give your children a chance to see what you've accomplished. They probably don't even know how talented you are." The comment struck me unexpectedly. Rosa was right, my children had no idea about my artistic abilities because I'd hidden them away the moment family obligations arose. I'd trained them to see me as someone whose sole purpose was supporting their needs and dreams. That evening, Matt came for our usual walk along the beach, and I showed him the recovered paintings. His reaction was even stronger than Rosa's had been. "So Joe, these are remarkable. This harbour series could easily be displayed at the Maritime Museum. And this portrait of Harold, it captures something essential about him that photographs never quite managed." I'd forgotten how much I love painting. How much it felt like the truest expression of who I am. "Why did you stop?" I explained about Elena's college struggles, about the endless series of family crises that had seemed more urgent than my creative work. Mac listened without judgment, but I could see the sadness in his expression. "Harold mentioned your painting often over the years. He was proud of your talent, but he also regretted that you'd set it aside." "He never said that to me. Harold was careful not to add pressure when you were already managing so much. But he worried that you were losing yourself in the process of taking care of everyone else." The revelation surprised me. I'd assumed Harold supported my decision to prioritize family obligations over artistic pursuits. Knowing that he'd been concerned about the cost of those choices made me wonder what other conversations he'd had with friends that he'd never shared with me. "Mac, I've been thinking about having an art show here at the house. Would you help me plan it?" "I'd be honored to help." "But so Joe, have you considered that this might be something to share with your children? A way to show them a side of you they've never really seen?" I thought about the conditional will, about the 12 months my children had to demonstrate genuine interest in my life beyond my utility to them. Actually, it could be a perfect test of whether they're paying attention. Over the following weeks, As I sorted through the recovered paintings and began planning the art show, I realized that the discovery in the attic had given me more than just forgotten artwork. It had given me a clear symbol of everything I'd sacrificed over the decades, and everything I might reclaim if I was brave enough to prioritize my own dreams. The paintings represented the woman I'd been before I became primarily a mother, grandmother, and family support system. They were evidence that I'd once had ambitions and talents that had nothing to do with other people's needs. They proved that I was more than just a source of comfort and assistance. I decided not to mention the discovery to my children directly. If they were genuinely interested in my life, they'd ask about the art show when I mentioned it casually in conversation. If they weren't, then their lack of curiosity would tell me everything I needed to know about whether they deserved to inherit the life I'd built. The conditional will had given them 12 months to see me as a complete person. The art show would reveal whether they were even trying. By December, the rhythm of testing had become as natural as breathing. Each interaction with my children carried the weight of evaluation, though they remained unaware of the conditional will that would determine their futures. I'd mentioned the art show twice in conversations, once to Elena during a brief call about holiday plans, and once to David when he'd stopped by to fix a loose gutter. Neither had asked follow-up questions or expressed interest in seeing my work. Lina had posted an Instagram story from a gallery opening in Los Angeles, hashtagging it with Art Feeds the Soul and supporting local artists. But when I'd mentioned my own upcoming show, she responded with a distracted "That's nice, Mom," before launching into details about her latest brand partnership. The memoir writing group at the library had become my primary outlet for processing these observations. Charlene had encouraged me to document the experience of establishing boundaries with family, and the weekly assignments were helping me understand my own patterns of behavior more clearly. "You've spent decades training your children to take you for granted," I'd written in response to a prompt about family dynamics. "They've learned that your love is unconditional and your availability is unlimited. Breaking those patterns requires consequences, not just conversations." The other members of the group, 5 women ranging in age from 62 to 81, had become unexpected allies in my journey towards self-advocacy. Margaret, a retired nurse, had shared her own struggle with adult children who only called during medical emergencies. Patricia, a former bank manager, had described feeling invisible in her own home after her husband's retirement, and her daughter's divorce brought multiple generations under one roof. We raised a generation of children who expect to be centered in every relationship, Patricia had observed during our last meeting. They don't know how to love people who aren't actively serving their immediate needs. The comment had resonated deeply, helping me understand that my children's behavior wasn't necessarily malicious, but rather the predictable result of decades of unconditional accommodation. I taught them that my love required nothing from them. In return, that my attention was always available regardless of how they treated me. Jerry Greenbaum called in mid-December to check on my decision about the conditional will. The year-long evaluation period wouldn't begin until I formally notified my children of the new terms, and he wanted to confirm that I still intended to move forward. "I do," I told him. "If anything, the past 2 months have strengthened my resolve. I've started mentioning things that matter to me in our conversations, and they show no interest or curiosity. They're not even trying to connect with me as a person. How do you want to handle the notification? I'd like to gather them all here for a family meeting between Christmas and New Year's. I'll explain the situation then and give them copies of the will so they understand exactly what's expected. That's going to be quite a shock. So Joe, are you prepared for their reaction?" "I'm prepared for whatever reaction they choose to have. I'm not responsible for managing their emotions about the consequences of their own behavior." The conversation with Jerry crystallized something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I'd spent decades protecting my children from uncomfortable truths about their actions, smoothing over conflicts, making excuses for their neglect. But protecting them from consequences hadn't helped them grow into more considerate adults. If anything, it had enabled them to remain emotionally immature in their family relationships. Mac and I were planning the art show for early March, timing it to coincide with the town's annual Spring Arts Festival. The Maritime Museum had agreed. Talona's display easels, and several local businesses had offered to sponsor refreshments. Word was spreading through the community, and I was receiving more interest and support than I'd expected. People are excited to see your work, Mac told me as we walked along the beach on a crisp December morning. Mary Henderson asked me yesterday if you'd consider teaching a watercolor workshop at the community centre. Teaching? I haven't thought about that. You were a teacher for 32 years, so Joe, you understand how to help people learn. And your technique is strong enough to give students real guidance. The idea intrigued me. I'd love teaching elementary school, finding deep satisfaction in helping children discover their capabilities and interests, applying those skills too. Art instruction could be a way to share my passion while building a new sense of purpose. I'll think about it. But first, let's see how the show goes. Are you nervous about displaying your work publicly? I considered the question as we turned back toward Maplehill House, the lighthouse beam barely visible in the morning fog. Not nervous, exactly, more like ... expectant, ready to be seen for who I really am instead of just what I can provide. For other people, the holiday season brought the usual round of family obligations, but with a new awareness of how one-sided these traditions had become. I hosted Christmas Eve dinner as I had for the past 15 years, spending 3 days preparing food and decorating the house for a celebration that lasted for hours and generated minimal appreciation. Elena arrived 2 hours late due to work. Prices that couldn't wait until after Christmas. David came with his family, but spent most of the evening managing his children's screen time and apologizing for their behavior. Lina fast time from Los Angeles, where she was spending the holidays with her boyfriend's family, appearing briefly on my iPad screen to wave at everyone before disappearing back into her own festivities. None of them noticed the small paintings. I'd hung in the dining room test pieces to see if they'd express curiosity about my renewed artistic work. None of them asked about my recent activities, my health beyond surface pleasantries, or my plans for the new year. But they were effusive in their thanks for the gifts I'd chosen carefully and wrapped beautifully. They appreciated the effort I'd put into the meal, the warm atmosphere I'd created, the family traditions I'd maintained. They loved the results of my care and attention. They just weren't interested in the person providing it. After everyone left, and I was cleaning up the remnants of another successful family gathering, I felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and loneliness that had characterized these occasions for years. But this time, I also felt something new, relief that the evaluation period was almost ready to begin. In 10 days, I would gather my children again and explain the conditional will. They would learn that their inheritance depended on their ability to treat me as someone worth knowing rather than just someone worth using. They would have 12 months to demonstrate genuine interest in my life, my thoughts, my dreams, my daily experiences. Some of them might rise to the challenge and discover that building a real relationship with me enriched their own lives. Others might reveal that they truly saw me as nothing more than a source of support and comfort. Either outcome would be better than the current limbo of unconditional love, met with conditional attention. Rosa arrived the day after Christmas to help with the extensive clean-up and found me in the sunroom organizing paintings for the upcoming show. How was your Christmas, Mrs. Kun? Successful in the sense that everyone enjoyed themselves and nothing went wrong, but also clarifying how I gestured toward the small paintings in the dining room that had gone unnoticed. I'm starting to understand the difference between being appreciated for what I do and being valued for who I am, Rosa nodded, with the wisdom of someone who'd observed many family dynamics over her years of domestic work. Some people love the idea of their family more than they love the actual people in their family. That's exactly right. And I'm tired of being an idea instead of a person. The family meeting you mentioned, when will that happen? December 30th. I'll tell them about the conditional will then. Are you ready for how they might react? I looked around the sunroom at the evidence of my recovered, artistic life, at the paintings that represented dreams deferred and talents rediscovered. Rosa, I've been ready for this conversation for longer than I realized. It's time to find out if my children are capable of loving me for who I am, not just what I can do for them. The countdown to the family meeting felt like the final approach to a destination I'd been traveling toward for months. In 3 days, I would stop protecting my children from the consequences of taking me for granted. In 3 days, I would begin the most important year of evaluation in our family's history. In 3 days, we would all learn what our relationships were actually worth. The family meeting convened at 2 o'clock on December 30th, in the living room where we'd celebrated countless birthdays, graduations, and holidays over the decades. I'd arranged the furniture in a circle rather than the usual scattered seating, creating a more formal atmosphere that would signal the significance of what I was about to share. Elena arrived first, driving up from Boston in her sleek silver sedan and striding into the house with the brisk efficiency she brought to all family gatherings. She wore a navy blazer over dark jeans, the kind of carefully casual outfit that looked effortless, but cost more than most people spent on clothing in a year. "This is unusual, Mom," she said, surveying the formal seating arrangement. "What's the occasion?" "I'll explain when everyone arrives. Housework going, busy as always. We're preparing for a major acquisition that could close in the first quarter. I'll probably have to work through most of January, but the partnership track requires these kinds of sacrifices." David arrived 20 minutes later with Martha and the twins, apologizing for running late due to car trouble and weekend errands. Isaac and Belle, now 13 and surprisingly mature, greeted me with genuine warmth before settling onto the sofa with their phones. "Where should the kids go while we talk?" David asked, assuming this was an adults-only conversation. "Actually, I'd like them to stay. This affects the whole family." Lina joined us via video call from Los Angeles, her laptop propped on the coffee table so she could participate from her boyfriend's apartment. Even through the screen, I could see that she was distracted, occasionally glancing away to respond to text messages or check her phone. When everyone was settled, I stood and moved to the center of the circle, feeling strangely calm despite the magnitude of what I was about to share. "I've asked you all here because I need to discuss some important changes I've made regarding my will and estate planning." The room grew noticeably quieter. Elena straightened in her chair, her lawyer instincts immediately alert to legal implications. David exchanged a concerned look with Martha. Even Lina stopped checking her phone and focused on the laptop camera. 6 weeks ago, I met with Jerry Greenbaum to rewrite my will completely. The new version includes conditions that each of you must meet in order to inherit as originally planned. Elena's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "What kind of conditions?" I reached for the folder containing copies of the relevant sections of the will, documents I'd prepared carefully to ensure clarity without overwhelming detail. "The conditions are based on demonstrating consistent, meaningful engagement with my life over the next 12 months. Monthly visits lasting at least 2 hours, weekly phone calls focused on my interests and activities, and participation in 3 significant events or projects that matter to me." Silence stretched across the room like a physical presence. Even the twins looked up from their phones, sensing the tension in the adult conversation. David was the first to speak. "Mom, I don't understand. What brought this on?" "My birthday." "David, October 15th. Not one of you remembered?" Elena's face flushed slightly. "Mom, we've all been incredibly busy. You know how demanding our schedules are, Elena. You've been busy for 20 years. All of you have. But you've never been too busy to call when you needed something from me." "That's not fair." Lina's voice came through the laptop speakers, slightly delayed by the video connection. "We love you. We're grateful for everything you do for us. Are you?" Because loving someone and being grateful for their service aren't the same thing. "When was the last time any of you called just to ask about my life? Not because you needed advice or help, but because you were curious about what I was thinking, feeling, or experiencing." The question hung in the air unanswered, creating exactly the kind of uncomfortable silence I'd been protecting them from for decades. Martha, who rarely spoke during family discussions, cleared her throat gently. "Mrs. Kuhn, could you explain more about what you mean by meaningful engagement?" I appreciated Martha's directness and lack of defensiveness. "It means treating me as a complete person with my own interests, relationships, and experiences. It means remembering what I tell you from conversation to conversation. It means asking about my painting, my reading, my friendships, my hopes for the future, your painting." Elena's voice carried genuine surprise. I didn't know you were painting again. I've mentioned it several times over the past few months. I've even started planning an art show here at the house for March. But none of you asked questions or expressed interest. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, I'm sorry if we've seemed distracted lately. The kids have been so busy with school and activities. And work has been stressful, David. The kids have been busy for years. Work has been stressful for years. You're 45 years old. When will your life become less hectic? When will you have time to maintain a real relationship with me? Belle, who'd been listening intently despite her youth, spoke up unexpectedly. Grandma Sojo, what kind of art show? The question, asked with genuine curiosity by a 13-year-old, highlighted exactly what had been missing from my adult children's responses. Watercolors and oils, mostly landscapes and portraits. I've been painting for decades, but I'd stored most of my work in the attic and forgotten about it until recently. Can we see some of your paintings now? Isaac asked, earning a sharp look from his father. Of course, they're in the sunroom if you'd like to look after we finish this conversation. Elena leaned forward, her expression shifting from defensive to analytical. Mom, let me make sure I understand this correctly. If we don't meet these conditions, we forfeit our inheritance entirely. That's correct. And where would the money go instead? I pulled out another sheet of paper, this one listing my alternative beneficiaries. Rosa Martinez will receive the house and a substantial cash bequest. The Millbrook Public Library will receive funding for their community programming. Mac Evans will receive Harold's book collection and enough money to travel comfortably. Several other people who've shown consistent care for my well-being will receive smaller amounts. The silence that followed was different from before, charged with shock, calculation, and the beginning of genuine upset. Lina's voice crackled through the laptop speakers. Mom, this feels like emotional blackmail. You're holding our inheritance hostage to force us to pay more attention to you. Lina, I'm creating consequences for behavior that's been hurtful and unsustainable. If you see maintaining a caring relationship with me as hostage-taking, that tells me everything I need to know about how you view our family dynamic. Elena stood and began pacing, her lawyer mind clearly working through the implications. This is highly unusual. Mom, most inheritance conditions are based on objective criteria: graduating from college, reaching a certain age, staying out of legal trouble. These requirements are subjective and potentially difficult to enforce. Jerry Greenbaum has structured the conditions carefully to ensure they're legally sound. But Elena, the fact that your first concern is enforceability rather than the relationship problems that led to this decision is exactly why these conditions are necessary. David had been quiet during this exchange, his expression cycling through confusion, hurt, and something that might have been recognition. Mom, I know we haven't been perfect children, but we do love you. Doesn't that count for something? David, you love the idea of me. You love knowing that I'm here when you need support or advice. You love the traditions I maintain and the care I provide. But do you love me as a person with my own needs, interests, and feelings? Because I'm not sure you've ever tried to know me well enough to love the real me. Martha reached over and took David's hand, her expression thoughtful. Mrs. Kuhn, I think I understand what you're saying. We've gotten comfortable taking your care for granted without reciprocating the interest and attention that real relationships require. Her acknowledgement surprised me with its clarity and lack of defensiveness. That's exactly right, Martha, and I'm 73 years old. I don't have unlimited time to wait for my children to decide I'm worth knowing as a person. Belle spoke up again, her young voice cutting through the adult tension. Grandma Sojo, does this mean you don't want to see us anymore? Oh, sweetheart, no, I want to see all of you more, not less. But I want our visits and conversations to be about building real relationships, not just checking obligation boxes. Isaac nodded seriously. Like how Dad talks to our teachers during conferences versus how he talks to his friends, the observation, delivered with the brutal honesty of adolescence, landed like a physical blow on David. His son had perfectly captured the difference between dutiful performance and genuine engagement. Elena stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. How much time do we have to meet these conditions? 12 months from today. The evaluation period begins January 1st and ends December 31st, and there's no negotiating the terms. Elena, I've spent decades negotiating my own needs. Downward to accommodate everyone else's comfort. I'm not negotiating anymore. Lina's image on the laptop screen showed her wiping away tears. Mum, I don't know how to have the kind of relationship you're describing. My whole life has been about achievement and independence. I don't know how to just connect with people. Without an agenda, her admission was more honest than anything she'd shared with me in years, and it gave me the first glimmer of hope that these conditions might actually help my children grow. Lina, learning how to connect without an agenda is exactly what this year is for. I'm not asking you to be perfect immediately. I'm asking you to try consistently. The meeting continued for another hour, with questions about specifics, expressions of hurt and confusion, and gradually, the beginning of what might have been understanding. Elena took copies of the will documents to review professionally. David made tentative plans to visit the following weekend with a specific list of questions about my life and interests. Even Lina committed to calling every Tuesday evening for conversations focused on my experiences rather than her career updates. As everyone prepared to leave, the twins asked to see my paintings as promised. We moved to the sunroom, where my recovered artwork was displayed along the walls, and on easels Mac had helped me arrange. The silence that fell over the room was different from the tension of our earlier conversation. This was the silence of genuine surprise, of recognition, of seeing someone familiar in an entirely new light. Grandma Sojo, Belle said softly, standing before the portrait I'd painted of Harold. These are really good. Like, museum good. Isaac nodded emphatically. Why didn't we know you could do this? Because I stopped talking about my painting when your parents were young and needed more attention. I got out of the habit of sharing this part of my life. Elena moved slowly through the display, her expression shifting from professional assessment to something approaching awe. Mum, these are extraordinary. This Harbour series could easily be shown in commercial galleries. For the first time in our conversation, her attention felt genuine rather than dutiful. David stood before a landscape I'd painted of the view from our kitchen window, the same view he'd looked at during thousands of childhood meals. I remember you painting sometimes when we were kids, but I never really paid attention to what you were creating. That's exactly the point, David. You never paid attention to what I was creating because you didn't think it mattered compared to what you needed from me. As my family left Maplehill House that afternoon, carrying copies of the conditional will and a new awareness of who I might be beyond their familiar version of mother and grandmother, I felt the complex satisfaction of someone who'd finally told a difficult truth. The next 12 months would reveal whether my children were capable of seeing me as a complete person worth knowing, or whether they would continue to relate to me primarily as a source of support and service. Either way, I would finally know where I stood with the people who claimed to love me. Spring arrived early in coastal Maine that year, with the last snow melting by mid-February and the first brave crocuses emerging in the garden outside my kitchen window. The art show was scheduled for the first Saturday in March, and the final preparations had consumed most of my attention for weeks. Mac had proven invaluable in organising the practical details, arranging tables for refreshments, coordinating with the caterer Rosa had recommended, and helping me price the paintings fairly, but with enough confidence to honour their quality. The response from the community had exceeded my expectations, with over 200 people expressing interest in attending, but the most significant development had nothing to do with the art show itself. For the first time in decades, my children were actively engaged in an event that mattered to me. Elena had driven up from Boston the previous weekend to help with the final hanging and arrangement of paintings. She'd spent hours studying my work, asking technical questions about my process, and making thoughtful observations about the evolution of my style over time. This early Harbour series has a more tentative quality, she'd said, examining paintings from the 1980s. But by the 1990s, your confidence with colour and composition really strengthened. What happened during that period to develop your technique? The question reflected exactly the kind of genuine curiosity the conditional will had been designed to encourage. Elena was learning to see me as an artist with a personal history of growth and development, not just as a mother who happened to paint as a hobby. David had surprised me even more. He'd started calling every Tuesday evening, as promised, but these conversations had evolved far beyond mere obligation fulfillment. He'd begun asking about my memoir writing group, my friendship with Mac, my plans for the garden this spring. More importantly, he'd started sharing details about his own life beyond just logistics and schedules. Martha and I have been talking about taking a painting class together, he told me during our most recent call. Seeing your work made us realize we've never explored any creative activities as a couple. That sounds wonderful, David. What kind of painting interests you? Maybe watercolors, like yours. But also, we were wondering, would you consider teaching us? Just a few informal lessons to get us started. The request had moved me more than I'd expected. David wasn't just expressing interest in my art, he was seeking to learn from my expertise, treating me as someone with valuable knowledge to share. Even Lina had begun to change her approach to our relationship. Her weekly calls now included questions about my daily life, my health beyond surface level, check-ins, and my thoughts on topics that had nothing to do with family logistics. She'd also started sending care packages from Los Angeles art supplies she'd researched carefully, books by authors I'd mentioned enjoying, small gifts that showed she was paying attention to my interests. I've been thinking about what you said about learning to connect without an agenda, she told me during a call in February. I realize I've been treating our conversations like social media posts, just sharing updates about my life without actually engaging with yours. The most meaningful change, however, had come from the grandchildren. Isaac and Belle had become genuinely enthusiastic about my art, visiting every few weeks to watch me paint, and asking if they could try working with watercolors themselves. Their interest had prompted Martha to suggest regular art afternoons at Maplehill House, creating a new family tradition centered around creative expression, rather than just holiday obligations. The morning of the art show dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp March air that carries the promise of warmer weather ahead. Rosa arrived early to help with final preparations, her usual efficiency amplified by obvious excitement about the day's significance. Double quotes, Mrs. Kuhn, I'm so proud of you, she said, as we arranged the last of the paintings in the living room. When I think about all these beautiful works hidden away in the attic, and now they'll be seen and appreciated the way they deserve to be. Rosa, this show is happening because you encouraged me to pursue it. You've been one of the most important influences in helping me reclaim this part of my life. She paused in her work, clearly moved by my words. Mrs. Kuhn, you've given me so much more than employment over these years. You've treated me like family, like someone whose opinions and feelings matter. Having this house to leave to my grandchildren, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. By noon, the first guests had begun arriving, and I found myself surprisingly calm despite the magnitude of displaying my work publicly for the first time. Max stood beside me near the entrance, greeting visitors and providing gentle encouragement when I felt overwhelmed by compliments or questions about specific pieces. The response exceeded my most optimistic expectations. By 2 o'clock, I'd sold 12 paintings, received commissions for 3 custom pieces, and been approached by the owner of a Portland gallery who wanted to discuss representing my work professionally. But the moment that mattered most came when Elena, David, and Martha arrived together, having coordinated their schedules to attend as a family group. They moved through the house slowly, studying each painting with genuine attention and engaging other guests in conversations about my technique and artistic development. This is my mother's work, I overheard Elena telling the gallery owner. She's been painting for decades, but this is her first public showing. The quality speaks for itself. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and it represented something I'd never heard before. Elena advocating for my accomplishments rather than just managing my involvement in her life. David had brought a notebook and was carefully recording the titles and prices of paintings that had sold, later explaining that he wanted to document the success of my debut show for family history. I want Isaac and Belle to understand that their grandmother is an accomplished artist, he told me. I want them to know that creativity and talent can emerge at any stage of life. Even Lina had arranged to participate remotely, joining us via video call and asking guests to show her specific paintings through the camera. She'd also promoted the show on her Instagram account, introducing me to her thousands of followers as my incredibly talented mother, whose art has been inspiring our family for decades. The conditional will have required my children to demonstrate consistent engagement with my life, but what had emerged went far beyond mere compliance with legal requirements. They had begun to discover aspects of my personality and abilities they'd never noticed during all the years when I'd been primarily focused on supporting their needs. As the afternoon progressed and the last guest departed, I found myself in the sunroom with my family, surrounded by the paintings that hadn't sold and the red dots that marked successful sales. The atmosphere was celebratory, but also reflective, as if we all understood that something significant had shifted in our relationships. "Mum," Elena said, settling into one of the wicker chairs with a cup of tea, "I owe you an apology that's long overdue." "What for?" "For treating you like a resource instead of a person. For assuming that your willingness to help us meant you didn't have your own dreams and needs that deserved attention." David nodded emphatically. "I've been thinking about this a lot since you showed us the will conditions. I realized that I've been relating to you the same way I related to you when I was 12, as someone whose primary purpose was taking care of me. It wasn't intentional," Martha added. "But we got comfortable with the dynamic where you gave and we received, without questioning whether that was fair or sustainable." Lina's voice came through the laptop speakers. "I think I'm just starting to understand the difference between loving someone and knowing someone. I've loved you my whole life, but I haven't tried to know you as a complete person since I was a child." Their acknowledgements felt like a gift more valuable than any sale or commission. After decades of providing care without recognition, of managing family relationships without reciprocity, my children were finally seeing me clearly. As evening approached and families began preparing to leave, Belle approached me with the serious expression she wore when processing complex ideas. "Grandma Sojo, are you happy with how we're doing with the will conditions?" Her question caught me off guard, partly because of its directness and partly because I hadn't been thinking about the conditions as a scorecard for several weeks. "Belle, I'm happy with how our relationships are developing. The will conditions were meant to encourage change, and that change is definitely happening." "Good," she said with satisfaction. "Because I want you to be able to leave the house to whoever you think deserves it most." Isaac overheard his sister's comment and joined our conversation. "Does Rosa really not have a house of her own?" "She rents a small apartment across town. She's worked hard her whole life, but never had the opportunity to build significant wealth." "Then it makes sense for her to have this house," Isaac said with the practical logic of adolescence. "She takes care of it better than anyone, and she actually appreciates living here." The twins' matter-of-fact acceptance of my decision to include Rosa in my estate planning revealed something important about the generational differences in our family. They understood intuitively that care and attention should be rewarded, that relationships require reciprocity to remain healthy. After everyone had gone home and Rosa had helped me clean up the remnants of the most successful day I'd experienced in years, I sat alone in the living room considering how much had changed since that forgotten birthday in October. The conditional will had accomplished something I hadn't entirely expected. Instead of simply testing my children's willingness to meet specific requirements, it had created a framework for them to discover aspects of our relationship they'd never explored. They were learning to see me as someone worth knowing rather than just someone worth having. But perhaps more importantly, I was learning to value myself in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The art show had reminded me that I possessed talents and perspectives worth sharing with the world. The memoir writing group had helped me understand my own story as something valuable rather than just a series of services provided to others. Mac arrived as I was finishing my reflections, bringing a bottle of champagne to celebrate the day's success. "How does it feel to be a successful artist?" he asked as we settled on the screen porch with glasses of champagne and the sound of waves breaking against the rocks below. "It feels like coming home to myself," I said. "Like rediscovering someone I'd lost touch with for too long." "And how does it feel to have your family genuinely engaged with your life?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about the changes I'd observed over the past few months. It feels like the beginning of relationships I've wanted for years, but didn't know how to create. Do you think the conditional will serve its purpose? I think it served a purpose I didn't entirely understand when I created it. I thought I was testing whether my children could learn to treat me better. But what actually happened was that we all learned how to relate to each other differently. As we sat watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the dark water, I realized that the most important inheritance I could leave my children had nothing to do with money or property. It was the example of a woman who had chosen self-worth over family harmony, who had demanded to be seen as a complete person rather than just a source of support. Whether they met the technical requirements of the conditional will no longer seem as important as the fact that they were learning to value relationships that require effort and attention from all participants. The forgotten birthday had led to a rewritten will, but the rewritten will had led to something far more valuable, a family that was finally learning how to love each other as complete, complex, deserving human beings. At 73, I had discovered that it's never too late to teach the people you love how to love you back. And perhaps more importantly, it's never too late to remember that you deserve to be loved for who you are, not just what you can provide for others. The lighthouse beam swept across the water one more time, steady and reliable in its warning against dangerous shores. Like that beacon, I had learned to shine my own light clearly and consistently, marking my boundaries and illuminating the safe harbors where real relationship could flourish. It had taken 7 decades, but I had finally learned to put myself first without apology. And in doing so, I had given my family the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to love me not just as their mother and grandmother, but as sojo artist, friend, woman, complete human being worthy of attention, care, and genuine affection. The birthday they forgot had become the birthday that changed everything. It's funny what 5 years can do. 5 years ago, I was sitting in my breakfast nook, staring at a silent phone on my 73rd birthday, wondering whether I mattered anymore. Now, I sit in the same place older, certainly, but no longer waiting for anyone to remember me. These days, they remember on their own. Today is my 78th birthday. The house smells like cinnamon and rosemary. Rosa insisted on baking the coffee cake I love, the one her mother taught her to make when she was a teenager. The Atlantic is the same relentless blue it's always been, but everything else has changed. And it all started with a forgotten birthday, a quiet rage, and a manila folder in Harold's old desk. I think Harold would be proud. Back then, I didn't know if my children would rise to the occasion or disappear further into their lives. I only knew I couldn't go on being invisible, couldn't keep bleeding love into a void. So I gave them a choice, engage or step aside. Know me or lose me, the consequences were clear. And now, 5 years later, so are the results. David surprised me the most. He took the conditional will as a wake-up call, not just a warning, but an invitation. He started coming every other Sunday like clockwork. At first, it felt scheduled, a little stiff. But over time, something shifted. He'd linger longer. He'd help me sort through old family photos, asking questions he never had before. He even started painting with watercolors, no less. We sit on the porch now, the two of us side by side, brushes in hand. His style is deliberate and clean, while mine has become looser with age, more forgiving. We don't talk much while we paint. We don't need to. Elena took longer. She fought the will, predictably. Not legally, but intellectually. She tried to reason with me, tried to debate me out of my hurt. But after the art show, when she stood in a room full of people praising my work and realized she hadn't known a thing about it, I saw the light flicker in her eyes. Not shame, exactly, but something close to regret. And regret, I've learned, is a bridge. She's crossed it slowly. We talk more now, not just about her mergers and acquisitions or my cholesterol levels, but about books, politics, women's roles, the long arc of a life shaped by service. She invited me to give a talk at her law firm last year, believe it or not, on legacy. Said she wanted her associates to hear from someone who'd redefined what it meant to leave something behind. I nearly laughed, but I went. I wore Harold's favorite scarf and told them the truth. that you don't need to die to be erased from your own family. They listened. So did she. Lina came back last summer. She's older now, less Instagram polish, more texture. Her brand shifted into something real. She started a podcast called Rooted about family, aging, and intergenerational healing. I was her first guest. She flew in from LA with 2 microphones and a heart full of questions. We sat in the sunroom, surrounded by my paintings, and talked for 3 hours straight. I don't think I ever saw you as a whole person, she said, wiping tears with the sleeve of her oversized sweater. You were just ... Mom, Grandma, the safe space. I didn't think about what it cost you to hold us all up, I told her. I'd stopped holding them, and we've all stood a little taller since . As for the will, I kept the conditions in place for 2 years, then amended them not because I changed my mind, but because they did. Rosa remains the primary heir of this house, and she deserves every inch of it. Her name is on the deed now. When I go, she won't just inherit the walls and roof, she inherit the legacy. Rosa's grandchildren already spend summers here, and I swear, they breathe life into this place the way mine once did, maybe more. Rosa cries when we talk about it. She still calls me Mrs. Kuhn, despite my protests, but now it's said with reverence, not formality. She runs the house now as much as I do. Sometimes more. And Mac moved in last year. At first, it was just for the winter. His furnace broke, and the guest room had fresh linens and a view of the sea, but by spring, we'd stopped pretending it was temporary. We share coffee, crossword puzzles, and silence. It's not romance, not exactly. It's kinship, companionship. We're 2 old ships in the harbour, too seasoned to chase storms but too wise to dock separately. He writes now essays, mostly, and letters to the editor. And he reads everything I paint, as if each canvas is a language only he understands. The town finally renamed the Spring Arts Festival in my honour last year, the Kuhn Creative Weekend. It embarrassed me at first, but when I stood in front of the community centre, ribbon in hand, surrounded by students from my watercolour workshops, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Seen. Maybe that's all any of us really want, to be witnessed, remembered, not just in death, but in life. My grandchildren still come. Belle is in college now, studying social work. Isaac joined the Peace Cause. Tommy, bless him, built a website to archive my art and my story. People need to know who you are, he told me. Not just us, but strangers too. I used to fear being forgotten. Now I fear forgetting myself. So I paint, I teach. I walk with Mac. I write letters to friends who've scattered across the country, women from my memoir group who've become my chosen family. I host Sunday dinners potluck style. No fanfare, and anyone who walks through the door knows the rules. Ask questions, listen well, and never assume someone's quiet means they have nothing to say. And every October 15th, I send myself a birthday card. I write something honest, something gentle, something only I would know to say. I seal it, address it to Maplehill House, and let it arrive a few days late. I like the surprise. I like the reminder that I am worth the ink. This morning's card said, "Dear Sojo, you taught them how to see you. You taught yourself how to be seen." That's not just survival, that's legacy. The phone has rung 3 times already today. David, Belle, Elena. Lina sent flowers. The note read, "Thank you for rewriting all of us." So yes. It's funny what 5 years can do. 5 years ago, I rewrote my will. Today, I am rewriting my life. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.